Sorry. Good evening, everybody, and welcome aboard. We are ready to start another journey of exploring Hashem's wonderful Torah and gift to us in an effort to be able to live more in the spirit of Mashiach 24/7 and lead our life the way Hashem has asked us to from the moment of creation. We're heading towards bigger and better than we've ever seen, ever. Let's do it. Let's learn our 3-step program, starting off with what's going on in the Yiddish calendar this week. And from there, we're going to go on to what's going on in the Parshah. And then we look for one practical, relevant life message that we can take away with us to be able to empower us to do the right thing. We are at a juncture in Yiddish calendar where every day almost there's something else going on. This is the Hasidic month of Kislev. Exciting times. We started off this weekend with Sunday, Shabbos and Sunday, Tes and Yud Kislev, the birthday and passing of the Mittel Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe, on Shabbos. And from there, we went on to Sunday, which was a celebration of his day of redemption. And of course, his redemption wasn't just his celebration, it was a celebration for all of us. And to continuation, the Chag HaGeula. We are rolling straight into a very special day on Thursday. Wednesday night, Thursday, we're going to focus on that for a moment, is Yud Dalet Kislev, the anniversary, the wedding anniversary of Rebbe Tzin Chaim Mishka to our Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, who was present at that wedding, which was so jam-packed with all the greatest and most famous amongst the Yiddish leadership out there in Poland. The Rebbe's father didn't make it to the wedding because he couldn't get across the border out of Russia, but didn't make a wedding without the Chassan Kala. A full-on celebration back at home. Yekaterinstav, he was a beloved rabbi, even though he was under the watchful eye of not just Big Brother, big nasty brother. And Reb Leivik made sure to celebrate with all the excitement that would come with it, including the teaching of Chassidus and the tremendous excitement that a simcha like that should bring. Years later, the Rebbe shared some special words and even later made a sicha and spoke in great length about how special the day is. But of course, to us, Hasidim, on the most simple level, as they're put it in the Rebbe's words, it's the day that connected us to the Rebbe and the Rebbe to us. It's the day that the Rebbe became the son-in-law of the previous Rebbe, although he was the same family name. Schneerson married a Schneerson. The Rebbe's wife was the daughter of the previous Rebbe Schneerson. They were distant cousins, almost fourth cousins, if I'm not mistaken, maybe, or a little offset. But the Rebbe's connection to the Rebbe was enormous. And already years earlier, the previous Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, was involved in suggesting the Shidduch. It was very, very cut out with all the mysterious nefesh that it brought. But it brings to us a very interesting, relevant way of leading our life, in the sense that the Rebbe's personal celebration, which to most people should be exactly that, a personal celebration. The Rebbe used even this opportunity to further the reason for all of creation, which is for people to be able to be inspired and do good things. And that message in itself, before we get any deeper, already talks to us. Whatever is going on in our personal life, whatever it is that we are experiencing or living with, we should aim to using everything, including the most personal matters, as inspirations for ourselves. And when possible, also to share that with others so that more and more people could feel the uplift in whatever it is that we are living through. So instead of viewing our personal circumstances as the exception to the rule, as the challenge to what's really supposed to be going, instead, everything would be part of the master plan to help big things happen. It so happens to be that Tezvav Tezai and Kislev are all big, exciting days as they build up towards the biggest Hasidic Yom Tov that we have coming up next week, Yutes Kislev, which will be on Tuesday, Monday night, Tuesday. So by this time next week, we will already be celebrating the Yom Tov of Yutes Kislev. To stand posted, I'm not sure whether we will or won't be having a share. We'll have to wait to see if the text message goes out. I hope we'll be learning one way or another. But Yutes Kislev, just in case we don't have a shir next week, is such a special day, so enormous on so many levels, starting off with the Alter Rebbe himself. The Alter Rebbe, on his birthday, the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. Not on his birthday, but on Yutes Kislev, he was released from prison, but it was the special day that his teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich, who passed away in Yutes Kislev, already told him that it would be a special day in years to come. And Yutes Kislev became the day of when the allegations, but also the attempt to shut down Hasidic movement, to shut down the gift of the Baal Shem Tov to the world, Hashem's gift, and stop it from allowing to become mainstream, which Baruch Hashem today, it's more than just mainstream. There's almost no facet in Yiddishkeit that isn't directly or indirectly affected by the teachings of Hasidus. And a major part of that was making it into almost systematic, rationale, understandable, or better said, teachable, where we can now learn, study, and acquire Hasidic traits using our minds and the way of life that Hasidus brings. Yutes Kislev is the celebration of that breakthrough. The story, in short, was when the Alter Rebbe was accused of all sorts of accusations by the Tsar of Russia, allegations that were placed forward and against the Alter Rebbe by those who didn't appreciate Hasidus, and they tried extremely hard to shut down Hasidus, and the Alter Rebbe had to explain all of his teachings, or a lot of his teachings, to philosophers and thinkers, many of them who weren't Jewish. And he amazed them so strongly during his stay in the Tsarist Russian extreme conditions. And some of the greatest, most respectable, reputable of the Tsar's officers came by the Alter Rebbe himself to personally interact and have conversation, converse with Alter Rebbe. And Alter Rebbe wowed one after the next, including the Tsar himself. And when the Alter Rebbe was finally released from prison, the celebration was enormous, and Yutes Kislev became instantaneously an enormous Yom Tov, and was reestablished year after. The Alter Rebbe came out to tell us that although there were people who were trying to stop Hasidus, and we won, instead of viewing it as a triumph over individuals or of a movement, and one side won over the other side, the Alter Rebbe straight away reminded us that we were on the same team. Not only on the same team, our vision includes all of those who tried to stop what the Alter Rebbe was doing and try to hurt and have the Alter Rebbe not only put into prison, but worse, chas v'shalom. They are also included in the vision of every single individual coming back. And therefore, it's important not to try and make them feel awkward about what they did in the past. Instead, try and find ways to help them want to return to Shuvah. Return to what? To their innermost self. A very powerful message from the Alter Rebbe that when good things happen or when challenges happen, it's the same. It's our vision of how the world has to be. And more importantly, it's our absolute confidence that's exactly where we're going. And Hasidus has brought so much to us, the gift. But indeed, when it comes to Yutes Kislev, we must spend time with that gift. Like everything in life, when we have it, we could forget about it unless we cherish it and spend time with it. Cherishing the Hasidus that we have, the gift that was given to us, and not only given, but entrusted to us to make good things happen with it is the gift of Yutis Kislev. So if you haven't planned where you're going to be for Brengen for this time next week, start thinking now. Exciting things are happening. Don't let your Dalit Kislev, the Rebbe's wedding anniversary, pass you by. And of course, we're in a time of redemption on the global level, but that could also bring to you redemption on a personal level for each and every one of us in what we need. And the Eibush should bench us all with every single bit of Geula that we could use with. That's what's going on in the Yiddish calendar. So if there was ever an exciting Chassidish week, this is it. We're on that run-up to Yutis Kislev itself. The Rosh Hashanahs, the Mishnah talks about 4 Rosh Hashanah. Arba Rosh Hashanah Haim. New Year for people, and including the things that get judged together with people, as in the first of Tishrei, as we know Rosh Hashanah to be. There are 3 other dates, including the Rosh Hashanah for trees that we might be familiar with, and those are listed in the Mishnah. After Yutis Kislev came about, there were those people who were very excited. How come the Hasidim have created and established a 5th Rosh Hashanah? The Mishnah talks about 4, and Hasidim have come along and said there's a new Rosh Hashanah. It's called the Rosh Hashanah for Hasidus. And we wish everyone, how can you do this? And apparently they came before one of the greatest Hasidic, non-Hasidic Rabbanim, who himself was a tremendous Yerushalayim. I can forget, if it's slipped in my mind right now who it was. And his response to the claim against the Hasidim, how come they are adding an additional Rosh Hashanah to that which is listed in the Mishnah? His response was, unfortunately, the Hasidim are adding and others are deducting, which is worse. To increase celebrations and high moments in Yiddishkeit, or Chas v'Shalom, to start losing the ones which are already part of our tradition. Certainly, we want to be in the camp that is growing and full of life, that sees purpose in every moment, that treasures every one of us, not just because we're going to toe the line, but because Hashem's reliance and in Hashem's gifting, in trusting us with His tremendous koiches is real. The choices that we make have real consequences, and they will bring about a change in this world like nothing else could. The effect of a Yiddish person, of a creation of Hashem, making a good choice in a joyous manner will really change the world for the better. Even if we can't imagine that actually taking place, we know that to be correct. So, once we have this sort of a starting point for our weekly exploration of Yiddishkeit and Torah and the life messages, Torah Melashon Hara, let's jump into a summary of what's going on in the Parshah. What we have is Parshas Vayishlach, and the Parshah overview includes where we left off last week. Last week, if you remember, those of us who were on, we discussed the 20 years of Yaakov's life. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 3 forefathers, our 3 patriarchs, and their establishing of the family of Yisrael, who would then later on become the Yidden, who were Makabel the Torah. So in their journey, in their steps, last week we explored 20 years from when Yaakov Avinu leaves home until he comes back, leaves Eretz Yisrael and comes back to Eretz Yisrael 20 years later, and he leaves with a shirt on his back and a stick in his hand. He comes back married with 4 wives, 11, 12 kids. One of them is Dina, loaded, extremely wealthy, highly successful, and extremely experienced in some of the most difficult circumstances a person could go through with the swindler, Uncle Lavan. And he finally reaches back to the border of Eretz Yisrael, and where he meets up the angels who would look after him within Eretz Yisrael. And now, at the ripe old age of 97, he finally makes it back to Eretz Yisrael. Takes him a half a year to get there, and then he has another 18 months in where he's living in Sukkos, and this is where our parasha opens up. Yaakov Avinu is back in Eretz Yisrael, and he knows it's a matter of time before his twin brother, Esau, the person who he had run away from, is going to find out that he's in town. And the reason he left all those years ago was in order to save his skin, to save his life from his brother, his murderous brother, who was after him for his life after taking the brachas. So here, Yaakov Avinu is figuring out what his best move would be coming back into the land of Yisrael. And the Torah famously starts off with a three-pronged approach. Yaakov Avinu hopes for the best, prepares for the worst, and prays like never before. Hopes for the best by sending gifts to Esau, not just a nice gift and a very nice gift, but also he works his heart. He sends the gifts staggered so that Esau gets wowed over and over again by the generosity and the care, the interest that Yaakov sends towards him. And this was a very special plan because it had a tremendous effect on his brother. We also learn that Yaakov Avinu prepares for plan B. Should anything go wrong, should Esau continue his path of war against him, Yaakov Avinu prepared for his best battle plan under the circumstances. You've got to remember, Yaakov Avinu has a very slow-moving group. He doesn't have a group of warriors, of fighters. He has a family with lots of young children. He has a lot of wealth in the form of not cash, but livestock. And that doesn't move around very quickly. And even with all the helpers, it would have been a family or a tribe that was set up to be a tribe, not a war machine. But when Yaakov finds out that his brother's marching towards him with 400 men, and they are on a path to war, he makes his best battle plan under the circumstances. Fascinatingly, he takes the Pincer approach in which he would create two camps, and that would give him the best flight option. So if one of them had to flee and the other one had to fight, at least some of them would get away, but also it would give them more firepower from coming from two angles, which was creative. But then his best bet was to daven to Hashem. He davens hard and he asks Hashem, remember, you promised me that I'd be okay. You told me to come back to Eretz Yisrael. Please, in your kindness, save me from my brother Esau. And he now is moving into position. He sent ahead the gifts and he's crossing the river Yaboik, which is going closer, deeper into Yisrael. And as he's crossing the river Yaboik with all his entire slow-moving tribe, with everything that's with it, he's personally crossing everyone, this Yaboik river. And he ferries them over, it wasn't an enormous river, and he stands in the middle and he passes things over one side to the other, one side to the other. And the end of the story, the Torah records how he left behind pachim, ketanim, small jugs, and he had to go back himself to fetch them. And it was then that he was on his own. On the other side, everyone was already crossed safely to the other side. There he was himself. Vayavik Ishimoy, and the spirit of Esau came and wrestled with Yaakov. And although Yaakov suffered a dislocated hip at the time, which the Torah tells us would be the same hip that would eventually become the hip of an animal, Yid HaNoshe, the sciatic nerve that becomes forbidden for Yidden, Yaakov's descendants, to eat. And that's why we can't eat the sciatic nerve. Yaakov, nonetheless, overcomes and pins down the angel. Until the angel says to Yaakov, it's already almost daybreak, I need to go. You need to let me go. Because I need to go and sing Shira, songs to Hashem. And it's at this point that Yaakov says, you must concede to the brachas. As the spirit of Esau, you must give me those brachas and give up on your claim to want to have the brachas that Father benched me all those years ago. And the Malach says to Yaakov, correct. Indeed, I will also tell you that Hashem is going to change your name very soon. Instead of just being called Yaakov, which means Akev, the heel, or could also mean Akev, which is twisting, in which Yaakov twisted out the brachas from Esav. Instead, your name should be called Yisrael, which is the two words of Yisarisa Kel. You have overpowered. You have become in charge of Malachim of Hashem, and that was a better description of your wonderful, tremendous, and great position. The Malach agreed to Yaakov. So Yaakov Avinu in this week's Parshah, if he gets, not only does he not Chas v'Shalom get destroyed by Esav, the Malach has already given him the brachas from this tremendous koyach of Esav. But then it plays itself out, not in the spiritual fight, but it plays itself out in real life. Yaakov actually meets up with Esav face to face. And Rashi has two pshatim, whether Esav intended originally to still go to war even after the gifts, or he had already been subdued by the gifts. But either way, at that final moment, Esav rushes over to Yaakov, who was bowing before him, and hugs him, and they cry, and they get together, and they become best of friends. So I'm sure that Esav even invites Yaakov to come and stay in Esav town, in Har Seir, to come and live with him. And Yaakov cleverly pushes him away, tells him, thank you very much, but I'll make my way there slowly. I'm very slow moving, don't wait for me, and I'll get there eventually. And interesting, Rashi points out the eventually that Yaakov referred to hasn't happened yet. The eventually that Yaakov referred to is when Mashiach comes, where Har Seir will become one of the lands that Hashem will give us in the extension of Yisrael. Yaakov does, instead of ending up in Esav town, pitch up in Shechem, just outside of Shechem, and he buys a plot of land. And the place Shechem still is around till this day, otherwise known as Nablus. And there in Shechem is a Jewish city or town, whatever you want to call it. And it's there that Yaakov buys property with real money recorded in the Torah. So it's not just he settled there, he acquires the land, and it's there that he sets up a shop. So happens to be, the Torah tells us the story, that the reason Shechem got the name Shechem, it was named after the prince of that tribe that lived there. And Chamor had a son called Shechem, and Shechem was a prince who knew no bounds, including abducting and raping Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov, who was living nearby. And when the news broke out and her brothers found out that Dinah had been taken and mistreated so terribly like that, but not only that, Shechem now decided he wanted Dinah in marriage. And he'd shown up to ask Yaakov to allow him to marry Dinah. They couldn't rest. Shimon and Levi came up with a plan in which they told Shechem that they would only allow their sister and themselves to do business and marry into the tribe if the tribe, all the males in the tribe were circumcised. And Shechem in his haste managed to go back and convince the entire tribe, to all the males, to circumcise themselves. And 3 days later, Shimon and Levi stormed the entire Shechem, swords in their hands, killed out all the males, took Dinah home, and Yaakov Avinu is so furious with them. What have you done? How could you do this? Their simple answer was, we couldn't stay quiet and watch what had happened to our sister and not react. Yaakov Avinu wasn't proud of them. However, he does pack up, he davens to Hashem, and they pack themselves up. He warns them not to take even a drop of spoils with them, to leave it all behind. And there they move on. It was there later that Rachel Imenu, the fourth of the mothers, gave birth to the 12 of the Shvatim. And during childbirth, unfortunately, she passes away, not before she sees that her baby is actually the boy that completes the 12 of the 12 tribes. and she's buried in Vayishlach on the roadside, which later becomes a big deal, and Yaakov, especially leaves them there. There's a story of Reuven moves the bed of Yaakov, and later on we have in the story that Yitzchak passes away at the age of 180, and we have at the end of the Parsha, we have the list of the family tree of Esav, who gave birth to who ruled over what, and in a very short space, we have the history of Esav until the end of Esav history. And from after the end of the sixth Parsha, we'll open up with a very detailed story of Yaakov's children, which will take us towards the end of the whole Torah, and then go on from there to Nach and the rest. That's Parshas Vayishlach in a somewhat of a nutshell. And as you can imagine, some of these stories seem like overly detailed because there are so many other stories that we only get in a medrash. And of course, if the Torah chose to tell us any part of the story in the actual text, you can be sure that there is mountain loads full of lessons that we can take from it. We're going to pick one of those stories. I'm going to focus on the story of Reuven and Shimon and Levi standing up to Shechem and the entire tribe and killing out all the men and rescuing their sister Dinah, and also the conversation that was had between them and Yaakov. And the way we're going to enter into this particular area is by way of the Gemara's deduction, the halacha that we learn from this story. Now, if you had to think, which halacha could we learn from the story of Shimon and Levi going into Shechem, swords drawn, and killing out the men, rescuing the sister? But don't forget, Yaakov doesn't agree with their actions. So perhaps they made a mistake in the way they went about doing what they had done. Or at least we can say that there's definitely a second side to that coin, depending on how we learn. The question is a bit of a trick question because it's not something you would expect to figure out on your own. However, the Gemara does say that it's from this story that we learn the age of where halachically a boy becomes a man. The age of maturity, where a person is responsible for their behavior and for their actions. The age where a boy that is responsible for all the mitzvahs, is the age of 13. We know bar mitzvah is at 13. Bas mitzvah is at the age of 12. Where do we come up with the number 13 from? From this story. How does this story teach us this? Because it's in this story that the boys are called Ish. Each man took his sword. Now, if you do the calculations, when Yaakov Avinu is in Uncle Lavan's house, he works for 7 years before he marries Leah. And then he's there for another 7 years working on credit for his second marriage, and then another 6 years. 6 and 7 is just a total of 13. Now he's got to still travel back. It took him a half a year plus the 18 months that he stopped off. So, and Shimon and Levi were second and third children. So Reuven had to have been born, and then Shimon and Levi. And the Gemara explains, goes through the entire calculation, that the Shvatim were born 7-month pregnancies each, and the miracle of the 12 tribes' birth included, besides for, according to the Medrash, also twins. They had sisters in each birth, but also that they got pregnant immediately, and their bodies somehow were strong enough to continue on having pregnancy after the pregnancy, and were giving birth to children in an almost miraculous way on our standards. And we have recorded in the Torah that after Leah had 4 kids, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, Vatamoid Miledes. The Torah says she stopped giving birth, and she realizes that that's it, she's done. And then she sees, hold on 1 second, the other wives are having children. She also wants to have children, and she gets the Dudaim, the plants, and she's searching, she's looking to have more children. Clearly, it was very, not only miraculous, it wasn't as taxing, perhaps, as we would imagine. However, that worked. The bottom line is, though, that the children of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi at this time, would have been both, although the one was older, one was younger, separate pregnancies from the same mother, they would have likely both have been the age of 13. One had just turned 13, one was almost turning 14. But both would have been the age of 13, according to the calculation, says the Gemara, that if we have the Torah describing these two youngsters who were just 13 years old as Ish, as a man, that is the source from where we know that 13 would become the age of Bar Mitzvah. And the question we're going to ask ourselves, which is the question actually of the Sikha, fascinating question. Question number one is going to be, is this age a significant milestone in maturity curve? Can we see in young boys at the age of 13 the maturity that you would expect from somebody who's held accountable and responsible for life decisions, for mitzvahs? What's fascinating is that in most countries in the world today, 12 and 13 years old, you're not old enough to drive a car. You're not old enough to vote, to decide who's going to be the next prime minister at the age of 13. That vote's still too young. We don't consider a teenager, at least the beginning of the teens, certainly not the tweens, to be old enough. Yet in the Torah it is. And we're asking ourselves, how do we reconcile the gashmis, the physical side of a young child at the age of 13, all of a sudden being considered a man? And that's going to be one starter of a conversation. And then off that, we're going to start asking two more questions. Why the age 13 is question number one. Question number two is going to be, why do we have to learn the age of our mitzvah from such a violent story? Shimon and Levi went and killed out an entire tribe, and that becomes the source of bar mitzvah. Seems a bit strange. The choice of where the Torah decides to give us the clue to the age of bar mitzvah seems strange, and we're asking, what's the message in this story, in this angle? And the third question we're going to ask today is, if 13 is indeed such an important milestone, however we answer question number one, then how is it that no other nation around the world follows our lead? Why does everyone else wait till 18, 20, 21? Why don't everyone else get the 13 idea? So whatever we're going to explain about the significance and maturity levels for why each boy at 13 reaches the age of bar mitzvah, we have to explain why that's specifically a Jewish value rather than a universal value. Or at least what the difference is. So that's going to be our three questions. Why the age 13? Why this type of violent source for a story? And number three, why is it a Yiddish value? Now you can imagine all these three things won't only explain to us what a bar mitzvah is. In order to answer the bar mitzvah, we're going to have to explain what a mitzvah is. We're going to have to explain and understand how we, human beings, relate to a mitzvah. And that's clearly going to be a lesson for us as well. So let's do it. Let's jump right in. Let's discuss bar mitzvah. Before we go and change the slide, is anyone feeling brave tonight? Doesn't mind explaining? If you have ever noticed, as in observed yourself, or heard a good reason or an explanation or any sort of perspective that will help us understand why 12 and 13 years old are considered old enough to be responsible. Go to unmute. It's *6 on your phone, Alt-8 on your computer, or just hold down your space bar.
I think 12 and 13 is an age where you become consciously aware, if that's, and responsible for your actions.
The responsible actions, that's the halacha. The consciously aware is very interesting words. I like that. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Have you noticed that yourself? Or that's something that you've heard, but may not necessarily seen on the streets. in the schools, in the high school playground? Is that what you notice?
Well, it's a change in youngsters around that age, isn't it? If you look at children developing, there is a massive change in their thinking process, logical thinking.
Yeah.
Not always logical, but much more logical than under that age.
Okay. So there's a major shift at that stage. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And it's nice to hear it from somebody who's seen it in real life. Absolutely. I'm just getting to that stage myself in my parenting. But it's definitely got, I've seen a lot of that as well. Where children are able all of a sudden to comprehend, to think differently. We're going to talk about that as well. Anyone else want to jump in on this one? 12 and 13 years old. Notice, obviously, there's the biological change that takes place around that age, which is also lends itself to this. And there was a question, which was the chicken, which one's the egg, which one's cause and which one's the effect, depending what you're into. But we're going to look at mainly Torah sources, but also we want to look at some secular sources that back this up or show how science is fascinatingly catching up to what the Torah has already told us years ago. So this is the text from the Parshah. It came on the past on the third day after they made their suggestion to Shechem about all the men, all the males within the tribe to circumcise. And on the third day, when the inhabitants of Shechem were all in pain, Shimon and Levi, two of Yaakov's sons, who were brothers of Dinah. Interesting, the Torah throws that in, brothers of Dinah. I mean, they were acting as brothers. Each man, remember the word man, took up his sword. They came upon the city with confidence and slew every man. So when Yaakov challenges him and say, how dare you do that? What do you do? How can you go kill our people like that? No, you put us all into peril and danger. What's the response going to be from neighboring tribes? And their response, they said, will our sister be made into a harlot? What could we do? There was no other option. This is their response. Fascinatingly, here's the question. How old do you think Shimon and Levi were at this point? The answer we already said is that they were 13 years old. Here's the Rashi quoting the entire process. In all the Torah, we find no instance in which one younger than 13 is called a man. However, we do find that the Torah describes a 13-year-old as a man. And where is that? In the Pasuk that says, Parshah, the Pasuk states, and Shimon and Levi, two of Yaakov's sons, each man took up a sword. We have it by tradition that Shimon and Levi at this time were 13 years old at that point. One who wants to calculate it may calculate it, and will conclude that they were indeed 13. So we have here that the source of Bar Mitzvah is going to be 13, and they were a man, and that is the story that we just described as we said it on the outside. So in order to understand the biological side of things first, as in the physical understanding of how it works, we have to explore some source texts, and just the conclusion that's going to be drawn from the next three texts, more or less, is that although the child is still a child at the age of 13 and even 14, 15, the development has very much started in their ability to comprehend, as we just heard earlier, but also in their ability to connect with ideas. The process of maturation is a long journey. It takes several years for it to complete and be visible on the surface. However, the journey does begin at this age. So although a child might not always behave and make choices based on the cognition, the understanding, and where the hearts are up to at that time, they have already started processing it differently. So which the argument here is that even if you don't always see teenagers making responsible decisions, but they can already get the concept of responsibility. They know what's right and wrong in a much more mature way. So making those choices, perhaps not yet, which is why in most societies, generally you wait till the child's 18, 16, 17, 18, or even 21, because they're not necessarily behaving that way, but the cognition's already started. Here's the quote from the Sikha: the commandments become obligatory at the age of 13, because that is when we reach maturity in terms of understanding and empathy. Seichel und Dea. Now, fascinating, the Sikha adds the words empathy to the understanding, because actually the understanding that we're talking about here isn't just the technical, informational, intellectual understanding. We're talking about understanding in a way of empathy. And we're going to focus on that empathy very much in these next few slides. What does empathy mean when it comes to maturity? Mature empathy means the ability to be able to not only process information, but to process information in the abstract, to be able to understand things not just as they relate to me, but to be able to start thinking about how others are affected and how things are processed by somebody who's not me. That sort of empathy, putting myself into somebody else's shoes and understanding what they were going through, feeling what they are going through, that is something that maturity brings. And that sort of maturity does start at the age of 12 or 13. So they may, although they might not be able to make extremely responsible decisions, but to start the process of becoming empathetic, develop the talent, the skill of empathy, and that starts already then. And when it comes to mitzvahs, that's extremely important. Not just knowledge, not just the ability to understand, but to understand and empathize. When the Torah speaks of maturity in this context, it is talking about our ability to empathize. The Torah isn't looking for intellectual prowess, but for emotional intelligence. Fascinating. This is what the Torah is looking for. The ability to relate to things outside of oneself. So to know things, or even to understand things, is not yet what we're looking for. We're looking for the ability to relate, emotional intelligence. Let's see some interesting, fascinating texts. This is from the Rebbe Rashab, in which he writes, to empathize is to really know. One can have a concrete understanding of something and still be unable to experience it emotionally. For example, wise children can understand something well, but they can't experience it emotionally, despite being intellectually sharp and smart. And this is because children lack the ability to really know, namely, to develop an emotional intimacy and feel the subject on a personal, emotional level, a subject and feel it emotionally, personally. The same applies to worldly affairs such as wealth or power. Children might be bright and smart. They may understand wealth and power, but they aren't emotionally attached to it. They don't have the same relationship with money that adults do. And the same is true of the other side of the coin. Children might understand the problems associated with loneliness and poverty, but they aren't distressed by such problems. They don't feel them as adults do. Interesting, the Rebbe describes about his mother, where being a child growing up in his mother's house, he never felt worried. It just wasn't one of the things. He described there was one time where he just felt the atmosphere totally change, and that was during the First World War, when Jewish people who lived on the border of Russia and all the neighboring countries were exiled away from the border. The Russians accused the Jews of being spies and therefore wholesale forced them to move. And where they were based in Yekaterinburg, Dnipropetrovsk, all of a sudden there was a tremendous influx of Jewish refugees, and his mother went into overdrive. He describes how he'd never seen anything like that, and that was the only time where he felt like, even though he's a child, that there was things to be sorted out. There were things that needed enormous attention. But short of that, children there could be people stressing around me, but in my little world, it's not affected, and therefore I continue as if nothing's changed. The emotional intelligence of being able to care and relate to a topic that isn't necessarily in my life, but it's around me. The people around me have that's emotional intelligence that starts to develop around this age, and that's essential for mitzvahs.
Is that also critical understanding? This emotional. I mean, there's that gray area that people say at the age of 13 you have the critical understanding, but it sounds like it's different than this emotional intelligence where you can actually put yourself into that other person's position and empathize.
So the answer is yes, you're right. The critical thinking is also there, but it's different. Right now, we're focusing not so much on the critical analysis and thinking. We're focusing more that children suddenly start to develop emotional intelligence, and that's in a way even more important than the critical thinking in regards to the mitzvahs. So yeah, the answer is you're right.
Because the modern world tends to deem emotional intelligence and critical understanding is differential, and that's why if you lack the critical understanding, they put you as not responsible until an older age.
Okay, you've almost given the whole share. Yeah, but we're going down that line. That's where we're going.
Okay.
And that's going to be the answer to our third question, as in how come it's only a Jewish thing at 13? And this is what we're going to focus on. Okay, so hold on. You got the cards. Let's just hold on to them as we build up, because we're gonna step through this fascinating understanding and message for us from Torah. So children lack the ability to perceive and feel how precious and valuable a mitzvah is, and how much we lose when we fail to observe the divine commandments. So we're not talking about how much money we're going to gain, how much more comfortable our life's going to be. We're just talking about what difference will be made to Hashem's master plan. How relevant, how much I should care about doing or not doing what I'm about to do or not do. And there's going to be a different thing about critical thinking as well, but here's what we're looking at. We're looking at, in Hebrew, this is usually the Hasidic translation of the word das, chachma bina das, where you have wisdom, knowledge, wisdom, understanding. And the third thing is knowledge. But to know something doesn't just mean that you could repeat it and you can ask me questions and I'll answer it. To know something means to become close to it, to actually relate to it. And that's what we're focusing on. So what we said so far is, to be obligated to do a mitzvah, we need to be able to feel its gravity and importance. We need to learn how to feel and be moved by something inside of us. For that, we need to develop empathy. And that's why the age of 13 or 12 is a critical age, the turning point age. Now, I can't see for sure, but I think most of us on this call have passed Bar and Bas Mitzvah. If this is what's expected for us, and this is what happened to us as we shifted, our approach to mitzvahs should carry an enormous amount of this, if we can help it. And we can. This is what we want to be thinking about. When I'm about to do a mitzvah, is to appreciate the empathy, to appreciate, to relate to how important the gravity of what's going on every time I make a decision. Now think about it. Sometimes I can have very valid excuses to not do what I need to do. It's so cold outside, I don't want to get out of bed. I'm so hungry, I'm so tired. There's so many different reasons why I don't have to do what I should do. But if I can feel why what I'm going to do is important, the intellectual arguments are secondary. Because all the arguments in the world, once I can feel the importance of what I'm doing, it takes on a whole new life of its own, regardless of the arguments, perhaps. But this is where the child starts becoming an adult. This is where the child starts being responsible to appreciate mitzvahs, because we can now start to empathize. This is on the probably the Gashmia side, the physical side of things. Here's some interesting quotes that back up from the secular sources. Today's business psychologists assert that children become capable of abstract thought and empathy as they enter their teens. In other words, this ancient Torah teaching is echoed by modern psychology, and it's finally catching up. Here's some quotes. 1, 2. I'm just going to flick through them. Who's this one? Lawrence Goldberg. And then you have here from in the neurological, in the actual physical makeup of the brain, where it's constantly called pruning of neuron connections, where when a child's growing up, there's loads of information flying in. And at a certain point, around the age of 11 and 12, the mind starts cutting off neurons, disconnecting certain circuits that are no longer relevant, and enhancing the ability of the brain to focus on the things that the brain needs to focus on. So that's an enormous maturity, not so much in the ability to make responsible decisions, critical thinking, but in the ability to care about the things that need to be cared about. The circuits in the brain are now focusing on the right things. Fascinating. So bring it back to a question. Sorry. This would be the answer to our question, why at the age of 13, on our first round of answers. If we had to walk away and ask why 13, because the Torah said so, what's the logic? What's the understanding? How can 13 be responsible? The answer we have right now is we're not looking for responsibility. We're looking for maturity and empathy, and that is already here at the age of 13, and that's what Mechuyev Mitzvahs. Answering the next question is going to make us revisit that first question. The next question we're going to ask for is, why does the Torah choose such a bloody and violent event to be the source of teaching us to age 13? In order to answer that, we're going to go back and say, actually, there's another reason, perhaps a better reason, why the age 13 is the age of Bar and Bas Mitzvah, 12 and 13 age of Bar and Bas Mitzvah. It's going to create a question. But let's just do this. This is from Rabbi Ashim and Yechiel, Shalos Chuvas. With respect to Yekuri, how do we know that they only become liable for our transgression at the age of 13 but not before? Know that this is a ruling that Hashem gave to Moshe on Har Sinai. It's tradition. For Hashem taught Moshe a minimum measure for every requirement in the Torah, and shiurim, measurements, are Mahalach Moshe Sinai. It doesn't need a reason. It's from Hashem. And Moshe Rabbeinu came and taught us the secret. The age of 12 and 13 is the age when we are expected to start keeping mitzvahs. It happens to be one second. Here we go. The primary and final state of the sacred soul's entry into the body, the neshama hakdosha, the holy neshama of a person, completes the entry into the person at the age of 13 for a boy and 12 for a girl. Says the Shulchan Aruch, this is why they become obligated in the Torah's commandments at that age. This is an entirely different school of thought, seemingly, to everything we said until now. We just came up with a whole logical conclusion, understanding what a mitzvah needs. It needs to be empathetic. We need to be able to care about it. And then we looked at some sources that describe that the age of 12 and 13 is the time that it happens. And based on the source text in the Pasuk, we found that the age of 13, the boy was called a man, and that ties in with the emotional maturity of the child. All of a sudden, we've just put on the screen a few other texts that seem to be suggesting an entirely different train of thought. It's not from a Pasuk. And it's not because there's a rationale or an explanation to that. The reason why the age is 13 is because Moshe Rabbeinu taught us a secret. And that secret is that there's something called the neshama. And the soul, which is the neshama, enters the body at birth, but not completely. And it's only fully present in the person, miraculously, at the age of 12 or 13, boy or girl, respectively. And that's why you become bar and bas mitzvah. And this is very different. Perhaps one of the major differences would be, what would be a difference? Maybe they should have a mitzvah noyach, where you don't have a neshama. The idea, though, that it's not necessarily based on an understanding or an explanation. It's based on a neshama commitment that comes about when a person turns bar mitzvah. It's not just because then we can care, because we can get emotionally involved. It's because then we have something that's just neshama. Neshama is a part of Hashem. It's so committed, it's so higher power that it has the ability to even say no to something I really want and say yes to something I really don't want. That sort of neshama commitment is only available to a person once they've reached the full capacity of neshama, the age of 12 or 13, and that's why they come bar bas mitzvah. So the Sikha suggests that actually we have two parallel understandings that are both correct, because we have two parallel realities that change at the age of 12 and 13. On one level, we have changed cognitively, emotionally, we have developed and become mature, and therefore we can be expected to rationally connect and care about the mitzvahs more, emotionally connect. At the same time, on a deeper reality, we have also acquired an neshama, which is, regardless of how we feel about things, capable of doing whatever it takes to do the mitzvah. Now we can become commanded to do mitzvahs because we have a neshama. The next step is the clincher. We have to appreciate that there are times where we don't need to rely on deep conviction that disregards my own feelings and my own thought processes. A lot of the time, we care about doing the right thing. We feel it. We even know it. And during those times, we connect with the mitzvah emotionally and fully. And that's very good. That's extremely good. And that's what we're going to call the first track to the age 12 and 13. However, besides for that track, there's a deeper track. And that one, which we've learned second, but is actually more foundational, is the core of how it really works. And that is that when I don't feel that way, when I feel like not that way, I feel like not doing it, that's when I need to dig deeper and allow the neshama to shine forth. Fascinatingly, the Sikha makes an argument that at the age of 12 and 13, the passionate, youthful energy is so much stronger. It gets tempered and fizzles a little bit as we mature. And as we grow older, we're no longer that passionate. Now, for a lot of people, that's just the rushing bloods of the hormones that needs to be reined in. But not in Yiddish terms. In Yiddishkeit, youth is the engine of the world. And the engine of the world, the ability to be able to make passionate decisions and passionate commitments beyond even how we feel, is such a treasure. We can't wait until a child's grown older than that and lost that enormous commitment. The power of a teenager, of a youth, coupled obviously with the ability to feel and to care. Like the boy said, their only response to their father said, "How could you do this?" Their response was, "How could we not? She's our sister." In that single statement, they summed up these two ideas. On the one hand, she's our sister. We care about her. How can we not do that for our sister? The empathy, just to put ourselves into her shoes. How could we not do anything as extreme as this? And equally, to be willing to do something that if you were to rationalize about it, even Yaakov said, "How did you do this?" And they just jumped in, put their lives on the line. Youngsters at 13 years old, 2 kids against the whole village. But we did it with commitment because the conviction was much stronger than just the rationale. "Oh, I care about this." It was something burning inside of them. This is a bar and bas mitzvah. This is somebody who's capable to buy into the mitzvahs and create a foundation that even as people mature and slow down and are less passionate, unfortunately, we still have that baseline that tells me I will do it regardless of which. And this is what it takes to become connected to a mitzvah, any mitzvah. Not a mitzvah that has to be bloody or violent. Every mitzvah has to have the passion and the excitement of knowing that what I'm about to do really matters. And the neshama inside of me is so on fire, even to the extent of Shimon and Levi's passion that drove them to do something that we could argue and discuss whether it was right or wrong. They didn't even think. Once they knew that this is what they had to do, to us that would include maturity, and therefore we'd only do what we were supposed to do. But the passion, don't lose the passion. That's the obligation of a mitzvah. To do it with empathy and to do it with passion. Now we go back to why it is that only Yiddishkeit sets up mitzvahs for the age of 13. Compared to most societies that wait till 18. They're looking for, imagine, most nations are built around the kingdom, securing the land, age of army, responsibilities to the state. Responsibilities to the state Yes, you need people who are critical thinkers. They can make decisions. That's the correct age. You know what? In the Jewish army, they also didn't go into the army at the age of 13. They would wait till the age of 20 before they were conscripted, because that's a different measurement. Mitzvahs isn't about whether I can protect the state or not. It's whether I can find within me the empathy, the care, the understanding of how much my decision makes a difference, plus, very importantly, the passion of doing the right thing just because it's right. The excitement, the youthfulness, and what that brings. So let's not grow old. As famously an elder Chassid once said, how old am I? I'm the age of 3 20-year-olds. Well, I think he said 3 30-year-olds. But the same idea. I'm the age of 3 30-year-olds, because a 30-year-old's full of life, a 20-year-old's full of life, a 13-year-old's full of life. But we should have 5 and 10 times a 13-year-old full of life, and we shouldn't slow down. And Hashem should give us the koyach, to keep on being passionate about every single one of our mitzvahs, have a geschmack, nachas, the pleasure of knowing that I'm going to do what Hashem has asked me to do, whatever that might be, in every circumstance, even if it means I'm going to take a nap, even if it means I'm going to sit on the couch and read a little bit, because that's what I need right now, with passion, the excitement of doing the right thing right now. And Hashem should give us the bracha and the tzlacha, the chesed yom tov, and it should only have good news in each and every one of us in our lives. Questions, comments, suggestions are welcome. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And of course, a major shout out to Michal and Ekon for sponsoring tonight's class, the material that we just learned. Any comments, questions, or suggestions?